so you have to be very cautious when you're looking at, children using these cell phones.
This is a conventional 18-wheeler that drives itself, thanks to a $30,000 retrofit.
There is a strong consensus that global surface temperatures have indeed increased in recent decades.
Another anonymous ransomware attack, bringing Ukraine's main power provider to a halt.
Talk about the future of the internet. It may have just been decided in a landmark vote today.
You can't fully print a gun on a 3D printer, but you can print parts of a gun.
The world is an interesting place right now. As you're watching this, a number of things are happening around the planet that make it feel like we're living in some kind of science fiction story. Like we're falling headlong into the future.
Do you want to destroy humans? Please say no.
Okay, I will destroy humans.
No, I take it back.
It's no gimmick. Google believes self-driving cars will be a reality a lot sooner than you think.
Maybe we are. There is an uncertainty in the world that saturates everything. So much change happening so quickly. It seems as if we're on the edge of something unpredictable. Naturally, the mind reaches back to a time when society felt more stable, steadier, when there were certainties in human civilization that could be counted on. The past is when things were better, people sometimes say, a time when changes happened more slowly, if they happened at all. But this belief that the world used to be simple and stable is flat out wrong. History tells us that the world has always been unpredictable. Human cultures have always been in a state of flux and adaptation. But if that's true, then how have people traditionally dealt with an unpredictable world? How have they adapted to the fact that the future can never be known, that the world can be a cruel, unforgiving, and surprising place? One powerful answer is in the stories we've told each other across time. More specifically, an answer can be found in the form of the epic poem. Epic poetry is a foundational genre of Western literature. It pops up periodically across many different cultures precisely because it helps everyday people imagine their place in an often unpredictable world. But wait, what on earth does this have to do with science fiction? Or even Star Trek? How can the two separate types of stories be linked together in one internet video?
Enough talk, let's get on with it.
We'll get to that, and it may surprise you. But first, we need to go over a few things about what makes epic poems tick. From Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad to the Aeneid to Dante's Divine Comedy and the Song of Roland, the epic poem is a perennial form of literature that exhibits the same aspects across time and cultures, with some variations. There are 8 aspects, to be precise, that appear again and again. Here are the 8 aspects of the epic poetry form.
An epic poem features a hero who embodies the values of the culture, begins in medias res, covers a vast setting, features divine intervention from the deities of the culture, opens with an invocation to amuse.
An epic poem contains an invocation that also introduces theme.
Uses epithets to characterize people and places. Is made of stories and characters already familiar to the culture.
Okay, so let's briefly define these aspects using perhaps the most famous epic poem there is, the Odyssey. Number 1. Epic poetry features a hero who embodies the values of the culture. The hero of the Odyssey is Odysseus, king of Ithaca, creator of the Trojan horse battle plan. He's adaptable, clever, resourceful, strong, and has terrific stamina. Believe me, the best stamina. Oh yeah. He makes a couple of big mistakes, such as blinding the Cyclops and angering the god Poseidon. But on the whole, he represents the ideals of ancient Greek society.
You have your sword. I have my tricks. We play with the toys the gods give us.
Number 2. The story begins in medias res. This is a Latin term that means in the middle of things, or in the middle of the action. We don't start the Odyssey when Odysseus leaves to fight the Trojan War. We start very close to the end of his journey, when the war has been won, and he's been trying for almost 10 years to get home. We first meet Odysseus on the island of the sea nymph Calypso, his next to last stop before making it home. Number 3, the story covers a vast setting. Here's a map of the places Odysseus travels to in the Mediterranean Sea. His stops include Turkey, the location of ancient Troy, and various locales in North Africa and all around the Aegean. Pretty vast, right? Number 4, the story includes divine intervention from the deities of the culture. These are the gods of the Odyssey. Many of these gods are characters in the story, especially Poseidon and Athena. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, finds Odysseus to be a man after her own heart. She's just as sneaky as he is, it turns out. She intervenes by disguising him, disguising herself, and helping him get home. And then there's Poseidon, whom Odysseus makes an enemy of when he blinds his son, the Cyclops. Pro tip, please don't anger the gods.
Release the Kraken!
Number 5, the story opens with an invocation to a muse. The muses were 9 daughters of Zeus, each the patroness of a different form of creative expression. Invoking a muse is a roundabout way of calling up your creative energy, allowing you to tell the story most effectively. I'm wondering if there's a muse of video essays that we could call upon. Number 6, the invocation lays out the theme of the story. With the Odyssey, the invocation acts as a kind of movie trailer or preview.
Man of twists and turns, blown time and again off course. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. Heartsick on the open sea. He'll get home, but he won't be able to save his men.
You get the gist of the story pretty well, right? That's the point. Number 7, epithets or word handles. These are convenient shorthand characterizations that help the audience remember important qualities of people and places in the story. For example, the Odyssey refers to its main character as
wily Odysseus.
Here are some more.
The deathless gods. The wine-dark sea. Athena, whose shield is thunder.
You get the idea. And number 8, the events and characters are already familiar to the culture. Homer gets credit for putting the Odyssey in its final form, but it was originally an oral poem, passed from poet to poet. That means the story was marinating in Greek culture for years, possibly centuries, before Homer compiled the version passed down to us. Sitting down to listen to the Odyssey for the ancient Greeks was a bit like modern people watching a film remake today.
I don't know how to believe you. How can I ever...
Because you know me better than anyone else.
Shh, I love this movie. So, by now you must really be wondering what on earth this has to do with science fiction and Star Trek. Alright, I'll tell you. One word of caution first. We're not saying that Star Trek writers were deliberately creating an epic poem. Their goal was obviously to create a television series. But it is interesting to take this ancient genre as a template, lay it over something contemporary, and see how the two line up. And I think you'll be surprised how well Star Trek lines up with the epic poetry form. Number 1. Epic poetry features a hero who embodies the values of the culture. Each captain is the obvious choice for hero of his or her series, but the captains don't work in isolation. They depend on their crews. Captains coordinate and enable cooperation. The crew as a whole becomes a sort of collective hero, displaying equality, cooperation, diversity, freedom. And aren't these values that Americans hold in high regard? Because American culture values these things, and Gene Roddenberry wanted to encourage them, the crew takes the heroic position usually occupied by a singular hero, like Odysseus. So we've got a variation on the traditional aspects of epic poetry right from the start.
In my experience, communication is a matter of patience, imagination. I would like to believe that these are qualities that we have in sufficient measure.
Number 2, the story begins in medias res. Star Trek is largely about the exploration of space. We don't begin the adventure in the 1960s, when we began exploring space for the first time, or even today, in our own contemporary time and place. Instead, we begin 300 years in the future, well after the quest to explore is underway. Number 3, the story should cover a vast setting. The Star Trek universe is enormous. Over the 50-plus years of the franchise's existence, writers have added wormholes, pocket universes, fluidic space, subspace phenomena, continuums, thousands of wildly different aliens and diverse planets, and whole civilizations launching out of menacing quadrants of the galaxy. It's a big place. Maybe only Tolkien's Lord of the Rings or the Star Wars universe are comparable in imaginary scale. Number 4, the story includes divine intervention from the deities of the culture. In epic poetry of old, gods represent a particular dynamic of the world that the characters dwell in. They are appeased and appealed to in order to effect change or transform a situation. Epic poetry characters have to be wary of gods, because the gods are generally selfish and capricious. When it comes to Star Trek, gods don't exist in quite the same way as they did for the ancient Greeks. Sure, there are some aliens as powerful as gods, such as Q or the Bajoran prophets. In Trek, though, characters use science to create technologies that have transformative, effective power. These technologies do for the Star Trek universe what the gods did for the Greeks, without the selfishness and caprice. Technology has shaped the utopia of the Federation, enabling its existence. Warp drive allows for the governance of the Federation's vast domain. Replicators and transporters, a foundation of the Federation's proto-post-scarcity economy, squash any and all material concerns. And Starfleet characters have to contend with technology in order to control their circumstances. Characters put a great deal of faith in tech. In almost every episode, they appeal to technical solutions.
I know this must seem a little overwhelming.
Overwhelming doesn't quite cover it.
Number 5. The story opens with an invocation to a muse. So, this is an aspect that doesn't really fit our model. If we wanted to push it, we could consider captain's logs a sort of invocation, as they're sending questions out to the audience and generally setting up the premise of certain episodes. Or maybe we could say that giving auditory commands to a ship's computer is a kind of invocation. But we don't want to push it too hard, so we'll just let this one go.
Please repeat request.
That was not a request. I was simply talking to myself.
Number 6. The other function of the invocation is to introduce the theme of the epic, and this one fits pretty well.
Space. The final frontier.
If you've ever listened to this little intro, then you know pretty well what you're about to get into. The theme of exploration of the galaxy is set up very nicely.
To boldly go where no one has gone before.
Number 7. Epithets, remember, are word handles that were used in epic poetry as shorthand characterization, making people and places easier to remember. Achilles is swift-footed. Odysseus is wily. The sea is wine-dark. In Star Trek, characters' ranks seem to serve this same function. Captain carries a whole suite of meanings. This rank indicates authority, leadership, ability to facilitate cooperation among the team, doctor, science officer, chief engineer. It almost doesn't matter who the characters are. If you know their rank, then you kind of know what to expect out of them.
I am a doctor, not a voyeur. I am programmed to be discreet.
I'm sure.
And number 8. The story should already be familiar to the culture. Here we have to present another variation on an epic poetry aspect, since the history of the Star Trek universe didn't happen in real life. There has been no actual contact with Vulcan, no literal James T. Kirk, or invention of warp drive. But the themes of Star Trek are the themes of American history. Stories of exploration, of culture clash, of classical liberal values defeating forces of tyranny and bigotry. These are all stories America tells itself about itself. It's a bit of a push, but I think you can see how Star Trek lines up with many of the aspects present in Homer's epics. So by now you're hopefully asking yourself, so what? Why should I care that Star Trek lines up with these aspects found in some ancient form of literature? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I've got more video. To get there, let's backtrack to the Odyssey for just a moment. What did that poem do for the ancient Greeks? For one thing, the hero embodies the culture's highest values and faces the culture's biggest fears. Odysseus shows grace, strength, adaptability, all traits important to the ancient Greeks. He can speak and deceive as well as he can fight. He deals with being lost, isolated from home and family, and he negotiates both the favor and the anger of the gods. There's also the sense that Odysseus' journey home provides for the Greeks a vision of the boundaries of their own civilization. Hospitality, or xenia, is one of ancient Greece's most important values. In fact, Zeus is both the king of the gods and the protector of travelers. Each of Odysseus' encounters with monsters and the many cities of men provides a different perspective on the concept of hospitality. Sometimes the natives eat his men. Sometimes they turn them into pigs. Sometimes they get them high and make them forget their home. Sometimes Odysseus is a bad guest, as when he invites himself into the Cyclops' cave, gets trapped, and must blind him in order to escape. Again, please don't anger the gods.
Very well. Release the Kraken.
But the central lessons of these encounters are all related to hospitality. Odysseus actually tells the story of his adventures at a banquet to an audience of people who are showing him the best hospitality he has yet received. The Phaeacian audience, and by extension the Greek audience, is learning how wild the world outside their boundaries really is. In here, Odysseus seems to say, this is where we get it right. Other epic poems provide similar big perspectives. Rome's epic, the Aeneid, tells how their empire was fated to be great and focuses on very Roman values: duty, sacrifice, allegiance to the state. The Song of Roland, written in 12th century France, stresses the values of the medieval chivalric code. And Dante's Divine Comedy, written at the beginning of the 14th century in Italy, creates an allegorical narrative based on Christian theology. So the point is this: epics helped everyday people imagine their place in an unpredictable world. They gave a culture a chance to see itself from the outside, to discuss, display, and dramatize their most important values and anxieties. An epic poem, we might say, was a culture talking to itself. However, when we come back into the present moment and look at our own culture, we're not exactly covered up in epic poetry, but we do have a genre that helps us get similar distance from our experience, to examine our values and anxieties. That genre, ladies and gentlemen, is science fiction. Sci-fi, I would suggest, is our culture talking to itself, and Star Trek presents one particular lens through which we can imagine possible futures. Why do we need to do this? Because our culture is changing incredibly quickly. The reason that science fiction has such lasting resonance in our culture is because our society is the first with a true appreciation of an exponential rate of cultural and technological change. But until very recently, that rate of change was so slow that it was possible for a person to see the world as essentially eternal, culturally speaking. For the audiences of Homer's Odyssey, or the Aeneid, or the Song of Roland, or any of these popular stories from our past, the world seemed rather permanent. Important values weren't expected to change, so the Greeks didn't write about the future. They might contemplate the gods, or the afterlife, or fate, or nature, but they were primarily interested in the present and the past. So were the Romans, the medieval French, and the Renaissance Italians. Since the 19th and early 20th centuries, though, the pace of technological and cultural change has been increasing exponentially. The world no longer appeared unchanging, and with most of the globe discovered and mapped, it also seemed less vast and mysterious. So traditional storytelling began to fail us. The only way to get outside of ourselves was to go into the fourth dimension: time. And so the beginning of that period of rapid change also saw the birth of science fiction and increasing interest in what's next. Science fiction is the only contemporary genre of storytelling that so willingly acknowledges the increasing rate of cultural and technological change. This acknowledgement is at the center of sci-fi's conversation about what the human world will face going forward. What'll we do about robot truck drivers or Martian AI probes that rebel against their human masters? How will we react if we have free reign to select the genetic traits of our children? What are the ethics of cloning our pets? If I get a memory upgrade for my brain, will I still be eligible to run for president? Science fiction has come to serve the same function as the stories we humans used to tell each other back in the old days. We gather around sci-fi to talk about what is right and wrong, about how we should conduct ourselves in particular situations, to ask questions about who we really are and if we might change fundamentally as a result of our choices. In all these ways, science fiction is our global culture, talking to itself. Within that framework, I would suggest that Star Trek offers a vision of what might come next for the United States in particular, pushing moments from our past into the future. In a way, Star Trek is a combination of two types of American stories. One type represents a tiny moment during the real-life space race of the 1960s, that moment of geopolitical contention between the Soviets and the Americans as they faced off in space for the first time. The other type of story, common throughout Trek, recalls the foundation myths of America itself, of explorers washing up on the distant shores of alien cultures and spreading their values to the natives. Science fiction even shares with epic poetry an ability to illuminate cultural boundaries. Remember that Odysseus tells the story of his adventures around the Mediterranean to illustrate to his audience the types of non-civilized people that live out there. Aliens in Star Trek serve a remarkably similar purpose. The cultures outside of Starfleet, Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, trace the boundaries of the unified culture of Earth through contrast and cooperation. The United Federation of Planets, a representation of the United Nations, spins even further outward to contemplate contact with cultures outside of the West. Romulans, Klingons, Ferengi, all help to define Federation values through levels of difference that require negotiation. Yet the outsider's role in Star Trek is even more complicated than it was in epic poetry, precisely because of our awareness that things are changing faster than ever. While both epic poems and science fiction use outsiders in essentially the same way, science fiction, especially Star Trek, has made it a central theme to include the outsider into society, which allows us to ask questions central to the American experience. This awareness we have of the changing world around us forces us to look towards science fiction to help us understand the world and ourselves in the same way we once looked toward epic poems. And because of its popularity, Star Trek, the most popular sci-fi property in the world, will continue to have a central role in that conversation.
Thank you for watching. If you like this and other Trexpertise videos, then consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. Any assistance you can provide will be turned into video essays just like this one. The first video chronicling my trip to Antarctica is live right now. Over there. Adventures in the Southland, Part 1. Check it out and see what the bottom of the world is really like.